The Heretic Order, Chapter 2. Harry opened his eyes and grabbed for his blanket. It had fallen off in the night. The truck's steel walls didn't insulate them from the cold outside, and Harry woke up and found he was shivering. Somebody was snoring. He couldn't tell if it was Owen or Morgan. As he closed his eyes, he heard a faint scratching sound. It was coming from outside. Harry put his ear to the steel wall. He listened and heard something scraping against the truck.
Maybe it's a dog.
He continued to listen and was certain he heard footsteps. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the team gathered outside the truck. Everyone was wearing their full battle dress, body armor, coifs, and helmets. "Weapons check," Owen said. The apprentices pulled out their edged weapons. Florence and Lily held out large knives with curved blades. Owen once said great warriors brought them into battle. Gurkhas, he called them. Jess, the Abbey's armorer, milled the blades, about 2 centimeters from the sharp edge. Molten silver was poured and set into the grooves. Silver, gold, and platinum stopped the vampires from healing, but silver is the most abundant metal for the task. The steel edge cuts. The silver causes a chemical reaction like lithium in water. The wound literally effervesces. Owen checked the kukri edges with his thumb and handed them back to the girls. Harry held out a tomahawk, the same weapon Owen used. The edge was true. James unsheathed his broadsword, a relic of his family's noble past. A distant ancestor used the sword on the 7th Crusade in the 13th century. Unlike the other weapons, James's sword had beautiful silver filigree covering the blade. The design ranged from depictions of medieval hunts to Anglo-Saxon flower motifs. It was as if his ancestors had anticipated the vampires. Owen turned the sword in the light and admired the design. He looked at James, who was stood to attention, and felt a little sorry for the kid. If the outbreak had never happened, James would be of age to join high society, then Eton, Oxford, the House of Lords. Owen handed the sword back with a nod. Owen stood in front of the apprentices and turned around to face them. "We don't have time to clear the building, so we need to clear the first floor and block access to the floors above. When we are sure the first floor is clear, Morgan will plant the hydro charge. As we don't know the layout of the rooms below, it will be a bit of a crapshoot where we get in," Owen said.
"How do we get into the vault?"
Florence asked. "When we figure out where it is, Morgan will use a second hydro charge to blast through the office floor into the vault," Owen said.
"Sounds simple,"
Florence replied. "We'll see. Outside the Abbey, plans are usually not worth the paper they are written on," Owen said. Morgan used his rifle butt and smashed the back window of the bus sticking out of the building. He made sure to remove the small shards left. He climbed on a red car covered in bricks and used the broken bus window as a step to get onto the roof. He lay on his stomach, then helped Florence up first. She aimed her rifle into a large opening in the wall and watched for movement. The rest of the apprentices climbed up with Morgan's help. Owen slapped Morgan's hand away and climbed up. Owen investigated the hole in the wall and mouthed something silent but offensive. "Florence, it looks tight in there. I'm going to need you to sling your rifle," Owen said. Florence spun the rifle on its sling so it was on her back. The rifle stayed in place close to her torso. She pulled her pistol, then instinctively pulled back the slide and let it snap back to load the first round. She preferred her Glock to the Night Sigs. It fit her hand better. The Knights have arguments over the heavy trigger weight of the Glock, but she didn't care. "We go in crouched. It will give us an extra second to shoot when the skulkers jump out and realize our necks are below them. Hold my belt with your left hand. When I move, you move. Focus on your muzzle discipline. I don't want another hole in my arse," Owen said. Harry laughed. "Oh, and Florence, put on your bloody coif," Owen said. Florence pulled the black mask from her back pocket and took her helmet off. She slipped on the stab-proof balaclava. The mouth covering was adorned with a painted skeletal jaw. The police issue, stab-proof coifs, were a recent addition to the knight's uniform. More than one knight owed their lives to these black balaclavas, so it became standard operating procedure to wear them for CQC. Owen nodded to Morgan. "Everyone else, stay here," Owen said. Lily furrowed her brow.
"Please be careful, Owen,"
she said. He squeezed her arm. Florence wrapped her fist in the back of Owen's belt. They both crouched, walked into the hole in the wall. 2 minutes went by before the first gunshots. The shots were quiet, sharp pops, just about audible to the apprentices outside. All weapons used by knights had suppressors. The prototype rifles had integral suppressors. The older rifles and pistols had suppressors made from copper pipe. They were not pretty, but they worked. Suppressors allowed the knights to use firearms without notifying every vampire in a kilometre radius. Even with the suppressors, the gunshots echoed in the tight hallways and sounded like a good hard slap on a horse's backside. A lone skulker will hide around corners and stand frozen in time until some unlucky soul comes past. The skulker would jolt awake and lunge around the corner at throat height. The knights didn't create the crouching tactic for room clearing. It was one of those common knowledge things nobody knew where it came from. By crouching, the skulker would topple over the lead knight, and the second would dispatch it as it lay on the floor. It required discipline, but it worked 9 times out of 10. The first burst of gunshots alerted the rest of the vampires in the building. Usually, if there were more than 3 skulkers, they start hunting. 3-round bursts of Owen's 6.8mm rifle were followed by the quieter single pops of Florence's pistol. The building was infested. 30 minutes went by until Owen and Florence ducked out from the hole. They sat on the bus roof without exchanging a word. Then he handed Florence his hip flask. She took a long swig and wiped her mouth with her sleeve. She noticed speckled black blood covered her hands, and she wiped them on her trousers. "Florence, when we get back to the Abbey, take the rest of the week off," Owen said.
But sir, it's Friday.
Harry said. Owen and Morgan laughed. Florence removed the magazine from her pistol. She pulled back the slide until a round fell out, then inserted the round into the magazine. She slid the magazine back into the pistol, then holstered it.
Safe.
She said. "Catch your breath, guard our exit," Owen said.
Will do, sir.
Florence said between breaths. Lily looked away from the pair. She felt a sudden stab of jealousy. She wasn't a natural warrior like Florence. She sometimes wondered if she could ever make Owen proud. Morgan climbed into the hole and the apprentices followed behind. Owen took up the rear. Losing an apprentice in the field was not unheard of. They wander off, amazed by the new world around them. Owen made sure to have one knight always watching the apprentices. They walked down the hall and passed the first door. Harry looked around the corner to an open-plan office. The desks were overturned, and brown squares of paper littered the floor. Owen pushed past the apprentices and turned around. "Bloody hell, guys, weapons ready. You are never safe in close quarters," Owen said. The apprentices hurried to shoulder their shotguns. Owen held his pistol close to his face and leaned around every corner. At each doorway, he extended his arms and pushed the pistol out, the same way his dad taught him 35 years ago. "Protect your mum at all costs, lad." Owen walked into a small kitchen and buzzed Morgan's radio. Morgan jogged past the apprentices and jumped over a skulker lying face down on the floor. The apprentices were far more cautious as they stepped over the dissolving body. They came into the office kitchen, and Morgan ran out past them back down the hallway. "We blow through here, guys. See the pipes? Water pipes are vertical in tall buildings like this. There will be a kitchen or bathroom above us and below us. If we blow through the floor in the office back there, we could destroy a supporting wall," Owen said. The apprentices looked nervous.
Owen, can we go outside when you set off the charge?
Lily said. Owen shook his head. "No, sweetie. Something could climb out the hole and ambush us when we return. While Morgan sets the charge, we will take cover in the hall, then move in to cover the hole," Owen said. Morgan rushed past the apprentices holding a large square of plywood. On one side of the board, the explosives were arranged in a cross shape. The other side had a rubber bladder filled with water.
Sir, why does the explosive need water on the back?
Harry asked. "Water doesn't compress, it projects the force from the explosion in one direction, towards the floor instead of towards us. It's a neat little trick of physics," Owen replied. Morgan kicked a chair away from the center of the kitchen, then placed the plywood square onto the floor. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 metal tubes bundled in wire. Morgan raised one side of the plywood and pushed the metal rods into the explosives. He unraveled the wire and backed up to the doorway. He kept unraveling the spool of wire as he reversed, came around the corner from the kitchen, and backed down the hall for 2 meters. His dark brown forehead was dripping with sweat as he inserted the wire into a small green device. A phone started to ring in one of the offices. Lily jumped. She was expecting an explosion, and the jarring ring of a phone caught her off guard.
What the hell is that, sir?
Harry asked. Owen waved his hand to shut him up. The phone rang again. Morgan smiled, showing a gold tooth where an incisor had once been.
"Go on, Harry, answer it if you want."
Morgan replied.
No, I don't want to.
Harry said. The colour had drained out of his face. The final ring died halfway through its high-pitched trill.
What was that, Morgan?
Lily asked.
I call them UFs, unexplained phenomena. Nearly 1 million people died within a short space of time here. My theory is that so much death creates a spiritual static. When the living come close, the static discharges. Things can happen you won't be able to explain. Don't worry because they can't hurt you,
Morgan said.
Shouldn't that be UPs?
Harry said.
Phenomena starts with a P.
Morgan squinted and changed the subject.
Ready?
Morgan asked. Owen motioned for everyone to get behind him and he kneeled. The apprentices followed.
Keep your mouth open, it will stop your sinuses from rupturing,
Morgan said. He held up 3 fingers, then 2. Everyone pushed their fingers deep into their ears. Morgan held up 1 finger. Lily felt the overpressure pass through her chest, and she couldn't help coughing. When she opened her eyes, the air was full of dust. Owen and Morgan each took one side of the kitchen doorway and aimed their rifles down. When the dust settled, Morgan and Owen lowered their rifles. "Okay, we're good," Owen said. Owen flipped down his nods, then jumped into the hole. When he was happy the room was empty, he dragged a desk back to the hole. It made a terrible sound, like a corrupted whale call. Morgan lowered himself down onto the table. The bus had crashed into the front of the building and sealed the ground floor off for 40 years. Apart from some water damage from a pipe burst many winters ago, it was pristine. Harry realized the air he was breathing was from before the outbreak. It was oxygen from trees that shaded young couples from the summer sun. Morgan, James, and Lily lowered the night observation devices attached to their helmets. Harry and Florence wore their nods, attached with elastic headbands. Harry gazed around the room, lit in pale blue light. The team started to spread out and check the adjoining rooms. Harry gripped his shotgun and wandered in the direction of a door on the opposite end of the room. He pushed it open, and it swung easy on its hinges. The next room had a polished stone floor like the church in the abbey. Streaks of white flowed through the grey marble. He looked up into the room and stepped back in shock. A skeleton lay in the middle of the floor. Harry composed himself. The skeleton lay on a black stain on the marble. It wasn't going anywhere. He looked up from the body to a large steel circle on the wall with a myriad of tubes coming off it. A dial glinted in his nods. It was the vault.
Hey! Everyone! I found it!
Harry shouted. He heard the knights running towards him and was almost thrown out of the way by the group. Everyone looked at the body for a second, then walked towards the vault door. Nobody could believe the rumors of the hidden vault were true. Owen pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and a pen. He sketched a rough floor plan and drew a small cross. Morgan had already left for the hydro charge. The second explosion rattled the building. The apprentices looked worried. Morgan joined them. He put his head into the black hole in the floor, looked around, then came back out smiling.
Christ, Owen, there's a lot of silver down there,
he said. James bit his lip. Blasphemy always made him angry, even if it was a superior who said it. "How much are we talking here, Morgan?" Owen asked.
2 pallets, ingots stacked 10 to 15 rows high, a couple ton at least,
he replied. Owen looked at his watch. It was 16 minutes past 11. Even if they missed lunch, it was a lot of weight to shift and be out of the city by nightfall. Owen put his head into the hole and double-checked his calculations. "Me and Morgan will take turns throwing up bricks from the vault. Grab 1 ingot in each hand and run it to the truck. This is going to take longer than you think so. Get a bloody shift on," Owen said. He jumped into the hole and a moment later 2 bricks flew back out.
"Take your armor off when you get to the truck, but keep your weapons on you,"
Morgan said to the apprentices. James went first. He grabbed the ingots, then sprinted down the hallway to the hole in the wall. He looked across the street for the truck. If he moved it closer, they could throw the ingots off the bus into the open back door and save time. He dropped the silver bricks onto the wrecked car, then climbed down and grabbed them. He threw the bricks into the back of the truck and pulled off his helmet. He clicked the buckles on his ballistic vest and threw both into the truck, then ran around to the driver's cabin and pulled on the door.
Shit, it's locked.
James ran back to the bus, climbed into the building and passed Lily holding 2 silver bricks close to her chest. For a moment he forgot his plan. James ran back to the group as Morgan caught a brick of silver and passed it to Harry.
"Morgan, sir. We need to move the truck closer to the bus so we can throw the silver bars from the bus instead of climbing down,"
James said. Morgan nodded.
"Good point, James. Harry, take the keys with you and reverse the truck up to the bus when you go with the silver,"
Morgan said. James looked at Harry. Why would Morgan ask Harry to move the truck instead of him? He was the hardest working apprentice. He was the strictest Christian in the group. James tapped his leg 3 times.
Envy James. Pride James.
Morgan grabbed a silver bar out of the air and threw it to Harry. He turned and sprinted down the hall. James stood behind Florence and turned to see Lily running back to the queue. She had removed her armor and her Nomex combat shirt, leaving only her combat trousers and a white vest. James's eyes drifted to her neck and clavicle. He turned away before she noticed. He had never seen Lily out of a combat shirt, which makes everyone look more or less the same. He forgot about Morgan picking Harry to move the truck. Morgan switched places with Owen at 2 in the afternoon. When Owen came out of the hole, he leaned against the wall and vomited. Lily rushed to him and rubbed his back. "I'm okay, Lil, just getting old," he said, and stretched his back. A silver bar shot out of the hole and skidded across the wooden floor. Owen bent down, his back cracked, and handed it to Florence. The next bar flew out and Florence grabbed it before Owen could. She ran down the hall and without stopping, she slid through the hole in the wall. Harry finished reversing the truck and the red brake lights blinded her for a moment. Florence threw the bars underhand into the truck. She unclipped her grey plate carrier and launched it in after the silver. Movement to her left caught her eye and she dropped to a crouch while bringing her rifle to her shoulder. A red deer lifted its head and stared at her. It was an impressive male with large antlers. Florence aimed at its side, a little past its shoulder. The animal stopped in the middle of the street and looked up at her. She waved at it. She didn't know why. The deer bounded out of sight and her hands shook as she sat down on the bus. Harry climbed up to the top of the bus and sat down next to her.
Are you okay?
He asked. Damn it, she couldn't show weakness to her team.
Yes, it's the dust in there.
She replied.
Shit, Flo. You don't need to pretend with me. I saw the bodies in the office. Your brain must be swimming with adrenaline.
Harry said. He put one hand on her shoulder, then pushed himself up and went inside the building. He slapped Florence on the back of her head and she shoved him into the hole with the butt of her rifle. Florence got to her feet and looked over to where the deer had been. Owen closed the back door a couple minutes after 6. His muscles burned and his stomach screamed. He worried he was getting old. Every mission confirmed his suspicion. He wondered how long the cartilage in his knees would hold out, how long he could bear the herniated disc in his lower back. He climbed over the shifting pile of silver and grabbed at the smaller pile of armor. Somewhere in the pile was his radio. He threw equipment everywhere trying to find it. In frustration, he ran to the front of the cabin and slammed his hands against the steel. 2 faint bangs answered back. Then the floor below him began to rumble. The apprentice's head started to bob as the low rumble sent them to sleep. Morgan slammed on the brakes, and the truck skid to a stop. Owen, having found his radio, clipped it to his belt and clutched one of the spare flamer tanks in his hands. He sneaked past the sleeping apprentices and leaped from the back of the truck. Florence stirred for a moment and looked out the side slit as he ran up the path to the church. She could see amber rays lighting up the sky and knew they shouldn't be wasting time this late so close to a city of millions of skulkers.
"So what are we doing here?"
Florence asked. Owen turned around to see his apprentice stood in the road. She looked small in the dying light of the day. "It's not every day we find a nest. This is a chance to take out a lot of them," Owen replied. Morgan opened the armored door to the truck cabin, and he held up his left arm, showing his watch. Owen waved him away.
"Sir, it's a church."
"It's just a building," he replied. He couldn't believe Florence, of all people, was trying to talk him out of burning down a church. The indoctrination of the apprentices seemed to create more fervent zealots in every new cohort.
"If the abbot finds out about this..."
Owen stifled a laugh. "We can never lose sight of our true mission," he said.
"And that is?"
She asked. "Kill every fucking vampire, every skulker, flyer and eddy," he replied.
"That's not the Order's mission anymore, is it?"
She asked. "Not for a long time," Owen replied. Florence looked at the ground, turned around and got into the back of the truck. She looked at Owen from the doorway and nodded to him before disappearing inside. Owen went inside the church and a minute later crept out. Once outside, he reached back to his belt and unclipped a silver nitrate grenade. He pulled the pin and threw it into the doorway. Owen sprinted from the door towards the truck as the church windows exploded outward with thick napalm flames. The flyers inside screamed. Their howling sounded almost human. One tried to escape before it fell flaming to the graveyard below, knocking over a gravestone and tumbling down a grassy hill into bones and gore. Howls erupted from the city. Owen shut the door behind him. He fell towards Harry's chair as Morgan reversed. They steered around a car, then accelerated away. James woke up and looked out the side as a large stone cross fell from above the church door and crumbled down the steps. He burned inside as the church did. Owen destroyed a house of God. His father, the abbot, would punish Owen for his desecration. Then he would have a more serious team leader. Captain Hollister, of the Special Tactics Group, could use James's talents. Morgan turned on the truck's lights and chased away the shadows. Driving the truck on the motorway was hard enough during the day, but at night it would have been impossible for anyone but Morgan. He eased off on the accelerator and dropped down a gear. He was approaching a mass of cars he called the Octopus. He sipped from his hip flask and, finding it empty, turned it over to pour out the last drops. A tentacle emerged from the gloom. It was a Ford. He swerved around it and looked right at the beast's head. A red Volvo truck.
Try to keep it steady, we have company,
Florence said over the radio.
Damn it, I need to slow down and cross over the central divider. Hold on to something,
Morgan said.
Copy that.
She replied. Morgan looked out the side mirror as a jet of liquid fire shot out in an arc and splashed a grass verge. A second arc of flame clipped one of the beast's wings and it nosedived into the asphalt. The second flyer grabbed onto the steel cage that covered the turret. If Florence fired the flamer with the creature so close, the flaming fuel could spill into the truck. More than one group of knights had gone out that way. Morgan heard the muffled report of a rifle and saw the flyer fall from the truck. Morgan slammed the brakes and the back end skidded left. He let it slide and punched the accelerator. The truck scraped the central divider and it pushed the back end out right, straightening it up. He tapped the clutch, released his foot, then pressed it in again. A bad gear change could be the difference between life or death. The truck's twin turbochargers squealed as the revs climbed. Morgan couldn't help but laugh with glee.
Sorry about that, I hope you had your seatbelts on,
Morgan said over the radio.
We're clear, it was only the two.
Florence said. Good job, Florence. Do you need a breather? Owen asked.
No, I'm good, I don't want to miss out on the fun.
She replied. Lily climbed up the turret ladder and handed Florence a glass bottle of water. She drank half of it, then poured the rest over her head. The flamer gives off incredible heat. The two bursts raised the temperature in the turret to 40 degrees Celsius. Lily couldn't bear being up there any longer, so grabbed the bottle from Florence and climbed back down. She looked at Owen as she got back into her seat, and although he tried to hide it, he gave her a big dumb Labrador smile. She always wanted to make him proud. She knew joining the Order was the right choice. Morgan pulled the truck into the Abbey a little after 3 in the morning. Rain covered the ancient stone buildings in a sheen that reflected the soft light coming from the church. They were home. The vines that climbed up most of the walls sucked the moisture from the rocks. Lily woke up as the soft rumble of the engine stopped. Her legs were stone. The only light in the cabin was from the thin viewing slits on the side walls. A moment later, Morgan opened the back door. The screech woke everyone up. One by one, they climbed over the small mountain of silver behind their seats and into the courtyard. Harry couldn't hold his head up as they waited in a line. Owen went to the gate to talk to one of the guards, then bounded back to the truck. Lily looked back at the silver bars spilling out the back. She smiled. She had done her duty. We don't need to move the truck until the morning. Go straight to your rooms and get some sleep. Good work, guys, Owen said with a salute. The apprentices saluted back, then turned and started walking to their rooms. The Abbey was a maze of alleyways and courtyards. Some paths led nowhere at all, cut off by a building added sometime over its 1,000-year history. The Abbey had been destroyed and rebuilt with every invasion of Britain. First it was the Romans, then the Vikings, and finally the French. Vampires were one of many who tried to wipe out the culture of Britain. They hadn't stopped trying either. On the first visit to the Abbey, it was easy to get lost. The place had a distracting beauty. You may live there your entire life and still see an archway or a stained glass window you never noticed before. Sometimes getting lost was a good thing. The male apprentices had rooms on the northeast corner of the Abbey, in a tall but slim building nestled between the church and the kitchen. It was one of the oldest buildings. The walls and floors were so crooked you couldn't go in after a few beers without being sick. The female apprentice rooms were on the southwest side, as far away from the boys as possible. The girls had the luxury of a small shared shower room with toilets. The boys had to share with the knights. Women were able to join the Order as knights since its founding 15 years after the outbreak. Vampires don't care about the sexual organs of their food. so it didn't make sense to exclude women from defending their lives. Almost as many girls as boys apply for apprenticeship, although when it comes time for their accolade, the ceremony dubbing them Knights of St. Agatha, it was 10 men to every woman. There was no special treatment, and they had stricter morality rules. One of the strictest was excommunication for pregnancy, hence the separation of the dorms. Pregnancy comes with the added shame of harlotry. Marriage is forbidden for knights of both sexes. By taking the oath to the order, every Knight of St. Agatha had promised to devote their lives to service to the Abbey, to Ravendale, and to Britain. James knocked on the door to the boys' dorm and Chris answered, rubbing his eyes and yawning.
Pulled the short straw on night duty, eh, Chris?
Harry asked. The teenager rubbed his eyes harder and brushed back his long ginger hair.
I always get the short straw. I'm starting to think you assholes are setting me up,
he replied. James patted Harry on the back as they walked in. The entrance lounge had 3 mismatched sofas and a large stone fireplace. It was cozy, yet smelled of wet moss.
Any notches for the fireplace?
Chris asked. He lay back down on a green corduroy sofa. Sleeping on watch duty was punishable by caning, but sleeping by the fire on a cold night was worth it.
Ask Florence. She got a few.
Harry asked.
Shame, the girls are beating us this month. I'm thinking about volunteering for burn duty,
Chris said.
Chris, no offence, but have you ever thought about joining the clergy?
Harry asked. James laughed.
Fuck you guys, I'm going to be in the STG one day, just you wait and see. I might speak to Captain Hollister about it tomorrow,
Chris replied.
The STG are at the Abbey.
James asked.
Rest and recuperation, that's what Campbell called it,
Chris replied. Beyond the lounge, a doorway led to a hallway lined with 3 rooms, 3 beds in each. At the end of the hallway, a spiral staircase led to more rooms in the 2 floors above. Harry and James turned left into the hall to their room. They snuck in to avoid waking their other roommate, Tim. They didn't like Tim. He was always complaining about things at the worst time. If Owen surprised the boys with a heavy PT session, Tim would meet them at the dorm and tell them the bread had gone stale.
Harry, what do you think about Lily?
James asked as he kicked off his filthy trousers. Harry turned around as slow as a zombie and yawned.
She's okay, I guess. Why?
Harry asked. James thought of her blonde hair kissing the tops of her shoulders as she ran.
No reason, good night.
James said.
Whatever, weirdo. Good night, James.
Harry replied.